Welcome to the FOD, where we bring you insights into the future of digital commerce for free. Season 5 is all about the move to composable architecture, and while it's not a buzzword anymore, there are still a number of unanswered questions, which is why I'm speaking to those who have the answers. In return, if you enjoy our content, we ask if you could like and share to spread the message far and wide. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Season 5 of the FOD, the future of all things digital commerce. Michiel and I first met following a mutual connection in Nanjali, our first guest in Season 4. Michiel has recently been promoted to Managing Director for Netherlands-based composable transformation specialist Lab Digital. Lab Digital boasts clients such as Frasers Group, Danone and Mars, amongst many others, and have led the way in composable transformations for the best part of the last 10 years. Michiel, do you want to tell the audience a bit more about yourself and Lab Digital?
Sure. Thanks, James, for the introduction. My name is Michiel, and we are Lab Digital. We're an agency in the Netherlands. We're about 80 people. And what we do is we help brands transform their existing e-commerce brand or service website. And we do that through composable architecture or composable commerce. And we've been doing this for quite a while already. We're just about 9 years old as an agency, and quite early in our existence, we started to adopt composable architecture as a technology, because we at that time, it wasn't called Mach, it wasn't called composable, but we knew that this is a way to set up your digital platform for the future. We're very passionate about technology. We're mostly a technical team, and we love a good technical challenge. So that fits the industry, I guess. And we're quite happy to early on help large brands like Danone and Mars and Suzuki and Toyota and the Frasers Group to adopt this technology. And having done it for a couple of times or since that long time as well, we've learned a lot, we feel we know what works and what doesn't work. And on top of that, what we like to do is turn those learnings into something that we can share. So many of our learnings we've turned into open source items that we can then share with the world, things like Terraform providers. But we were also one of the earlier ones to actually launch an accelerator. So we've launched Composable, which is our deployment platform for Mach-based platforms. And that's already 4 or 5 years ago, even when the term accelerator didn't exist yet.
Okay, interesting. Interesting. We're the term accelerator is coming to prominence at the minute with a lot of your competitors also releasing accelerators. Do you feel as though that the individual accelerators the different agencies are releasing gives you a unique advantage above some of your competitors?
Well, in a way, it makes it easy to talk about, because if it's adopted widely, we don't have to explain the term accelerator. And but in another sense, it takes away, of course, some of the competitive advantage we had with our early accelerator. I think the concept of accelerators is an interesting one in general, as it's something that really came about because of the things that are inherent to composable architecture. So you see that when looking at a solution that's best of suite or that's a monolith, you get everything out of the box. But composing a landscape out of best of breed SaaS vendors just takes a whole lot of work just to connect those systems together. That's where the accelerators come in. So it's something that goes with composable, and at the same time, it's also needed.
I think it can certainly save a reasonable amount of time when it comes to actually going through the transformation. If you've already got some code that you can take from previous experiences, then actually it can speed up the delivery process when it comes to delivering into the new existing environment. So I think there's certainly a lot of benefits to it, and I think we can come back to this in shortly on in the conversation. But you mentioned you've been actually delivering composable transformations now for obviously the best part of 10 years. So I think it's fair to say you've been doing this far before it became the buzzword that it has been over the last few years, which I guess leads sort of quite nicely into the first question for today, Michiel, which is how have you seen the growth of Composable? I guess from when you guys got into it to where it is now.
Yeah, we've certainly seen a very large growth. I think with 4 or 5 years ago, when the term mag, for example, didn't really exist yet, it was quite new. People were still, the most well-known solutions were still the monolithic ones. And I believe driven by things like COVID, you've seen a lot of businesses feeling a need to transform their digital landscape and moving towards a composable solution. And I do feel we've gone through sort of a hype cycle almost, where the term where a few years ago, COVID, there was a lot of money available also. Everybody had to go composable. The solution was always, we must go composable. And I do believe now we've seen the ups and downs of what composable can offer you. And in general, I think that the concept is very alluring. You can choose best of class solutions for each part of your landscape. As a whole, that's of course interesting. But we've also seen what it takes to actually do that. Money-wise, organization-wise. Conceptually, what it requires from how you look at your landscape, and it's been a nice learning curve, I think. I do think still, if you look at any transformation now, it's usually going to be composable, but it's been an interesting time.
I think it's fair to say that we've seen. I guess you've got the two ends of the spectrum, right? You've got like pure composable, where you have best of breed across all of the different vendors, and then you also have an architecture which is moving towards composable, where you might have a monolith, and you have a specialist search or CMS or PIM or whatever it might be, maybe even 2 or 3 of those. And we've been seeing that for some time now anyway. I know many a business that have had Ampliance with SAP or what have you over the last 10 years. You mentioned seeing some of the pros and the cons over the last 5 years or so. But do you feel as though there was any one kind of pivoting point in that period of time where companies really started to draw their attention to moving away from the monolith to composable, and looking at actually, okay, let's not just look at best of breed for our search, but let's look at it across all of the other areas as well?
Yeah, so there's a couple of interesting things that we've seen happening in the early, like let's say a few years ago. The idea was to go composable, you need to transform your whole landscape. That's sort of the where the thinking usually starts, because that's how you've been used to doing it with a monolith, right? You buy this one new system that replaces it all, and that's also the approach that where many of the thinking starts. If we talk to our brands, they have made a picture where they've selected or they've looked at all of these different SaaS vendors across all of different functionalities. And it's daunting because it costs a lot of money. It's a whole big transformation. So what we've seen change is the way to think about this. It's very unlikely that you need to really replace everything. There's a whole there's usually a whole scenario where you keep using a lot of the things that work with your existing architecture, but you transform or you go to composable for the things where the most business pain is, basically. So that's often a commerce platform or a CMS, or maybe it's the easiest thing to change is your search, for example, where you can introduce a new search and merge engine. So we've definitely seen that change happening, and that's also usually where we start to help, because each of the different SaaS vendors themselves, they have very good at explaining, and they have very in-depth knowledge of the thing that they do, but the landscape itself is composed of different elements. So that's usually where we come in, and we start to apply some realism or some longer term thinking to how can you get there eventually with a whole landscape of composable pieces. but maybe get there step by step. And another interesting thing that we've also seen happening is may not be 100% related to your question, but at the time that Composable became more popular, let's say.
Yeah.
We've also seen sort of composable washing. So some of the more monolithic products, or that may not have been built composable, have moved towards being composable. So they've opened up functionalities through APIs, or they've just called it composable and not necessarily fully adhering to the principles of composable architecture. And that's also made it increasingly difficult for brands to sort of wade through the woods of all of these terminologies and what is composable. And a while ago, even C-level decision makers, they said we got to go composable. They didn't necessarily know what it was, but they had heard of it and they knew that this is the technology to go with. So helping brands choose the right level of composability and the level of how far you go in your first landscape has been an interesting challenge. And lastly, if I can add something, we've also seen that there's the problem with composable is it can feel quite bare bones. If you have a monolithic solution, you can see it. It's something that you can demo. It's got a UI connected to it. Because it's got it all from top to bottom. So you can really look at the product. You can demo it. Composable, sometimes it's just a bunch of APIs. It's not a product that you can show very well. So the fact that you then have to buy a couple of these SaaS products and link them together, that can be expensive as well. So we've also seen the SaaS vendors themselves expanding their offerings by adding small pre-built functionalities, or by maybe doing a bit more than what the core of the product can offer, to deal with that feeling of bare bones and that feeling of I can't see anything. What am I buying here? Problem.
Yeah, it makes it hard, doesn't it, when you build something from the ground up? Like you said, there's not much to show at the start. So where do you go? But you led me to an interesting question here, because I was speaking to a couple of people recently, and one guy in particular highlighted the vendor sales teams overselling some of their products when it comes to both, not necessarily its functionality, but its ability to integrate with some of the other vendors. So these guys have gone through a transformation, and it took substantially longer than they expected. And partly, he says, is because when you look at the demos, they run amazing, and it's obviously set up to do so. But actually, when it comes to putting them together, there's far more complications than were expected or alluded would come their way from the sales team. Have you seen similar at all?
Yeah, well, we've seen the best results when a brand asks that question basically to a SaaS vendor and an SI, because we as agencies or SIs, we're the ones that have to make it into one solution. So we're more often, we have a more broad experience to delve from, to actually show working platforms where it's all connected together. And you do see the pressure to have the product be more than the core, simply because of what I said. It can feel quite bare bones. I do think the SaaS vendors that stick to their core are the easiest ones to sort of the best ones to work with, because even though it can be alluring to add a bit to your product, in essence, composable means sticking to best of breed.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that then leads me on to another question, which I think is one that's very prominent, and that is, who do you pick first? Do you go and pick the agency first because the agency has the expertise and they know that this works well with that, and maybe there's an accelerator that can put these two or three together? Or do you pick the vendors first because technically you go in best of breed, so the vendors should be aligned to what you want, not because it's what an agency said works well. So in your opinion, what would you go for first?
Yeah, that's interesting. I would love to say pick an agency first, of course, but that's not always the smartest idea. I think what we've seen in our experience, large brands that have a team in their organization that understands this technology well are probably better off talking to SaaS vendors first.
Okay.
But it requires a level of understanding of this technology. What are you selecting, and what does it do, and where do you envision, for example, product to live in the landscape, or what systems do you have in-house? And so if you have if you have some technical understanding, and if you have a vision on that, it's probably best to talk to the vendors first, because an SI will give you a view based on what they know how to do. So, us, for example, we partner with 10 or more of the SaaS vendors from the Mach Alliance, but we don't partner with them all. We can't know them all. We're 80 people. We don't have the spectrum of knowledge of every product. So we do give a view on products that we know. On the other hand, if you're a small organization or mid-size, or even if you're a large enterprise that simply doesn't have a very strong knowledge of this technology, it may help you to talk to agencies as well, because they, as you mentioned, they can give you that comprehensive view on how do you make a landscape out of these SaaS vendors, and how do you do that in steps? How do you do it from small to large, and where do you begin? And what does it mean if you instead of taking one product, if you create a landscape of products, what does that mean for your maintenance, and how are you gonna, where does some of that knowledge land in your organization? Those are things that we often know as an SI, and that a single SaaS vendor may know but may not necessarily know. So it's basically I would always say, once you know a little bit about what SaaS vendors you want to use, always attach a partner to make that picture complete.
Okay, I think that's probably a sensible decision as well, and getting that technical expertise before signing any agreements or what have you, because it may well be that there isn't a huge amount of difference between two CMSs that they want to use, for an example, but actually one of them can be integrated far easier and quicker and cheaper than another one, and that might be a big deciding factor for the end customer, right? So yeah, I think that's probably sensible. And look at the products, look at what ones you feel are best for you before signing anything. Speak to people that know what they're talking about, just to confirm that it is a sensible option, and then take it from there. But honest, like you said at the start, you could very easily say speak to the agency first, right? But no, I think I appreciate your honesty there, Michiel. So cool. Okay, so look, let's kick on. Move on to the next question. So, what, in your opinion, what is the number one reason why composable transformations fail?
I think the number one reason is a lack of a sort of product vision on your landscape. Because what we have to realize, if you embrace composable architecture, that instead of buying a product, you're basically creating one out of various SaaS vendors. So you need to have that. You need to have a view on now versus future on that whole landscape. If you forget about that, you may make a couple of choices early on that serve your now situation basically, but may not be scalable for the future, or may not make sure that if you create something for one brand, it's also suitable for another brand. So that sort of comprehensive vision on how you will manage and how you will create this landscape and how you will move it in time towards something that's fit for the future, that's usually where we see things failing. And there's quite a lot of considerations to make, right? How you can phase things, what do you replace and what do you keep? It's, as I said, it's not always a replace everything. It's actually rarely a replace everything situation. What's your vision on serving multiple brands and regions? Because you'd always start with one or two, but you eventually need to serve all of them with this landscape. but also some more basic things like who pays for this? Is it a central platform that pays for it all, or how do you how do you make sure that one brand that may have a large budget make sure that you can also use it for the smaller brands, and last but not least having a vision on how you organize your own teams and your work to work with this new landscape. Those are things that can lead to a failure quite quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Do you feel as though that issue is still quite prominent now, or do you feel as though as people have started to understand the move to composable architecture over the last 2 or 3 years, primarily, that's something that is now taken into consideration from end customers, maybe more than it was a few years ago?
Yeah, I think we've definitely learned as an industry.
Good.
Brands and us as well. Yeah, it's more and more we more and more see brands understanding this challenge and even having an early vision already when approaching us. So yeah, that's
Okay.
definitely. Yeah.
That's good. There's certainly something that's really important. And over the last series, many person I spoke to, they said about having the business buy-in and making sure that the entire business is aware of the changes that it will need to go through from both leadership and employee level, because it does impact everyone. So good. Pleased to see that, in your opinion anyway, that we're starting to make promising movements through that situation.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you were giving advice to an end customer, which I'm sure you do often, what are the top 3 things you would say to them in order to have a successful transformation?
Yeah, so I think one of the first ones that we've touched on a couple of times already is define where the most value lies, and start there.
Okay.
It's rarely a big bang. You rarely need a big bang. Usually you can start small and introduce a couple of SaaS vendors instead of replacing the whole. The second one I would say is, and this is an interesting one, why would you go composable in tech, but look for an SI or an agency that can do it all? So consider, and I've heard your last season, there are a few brands that also mentioned this, that consider that you can also do this with a couple of partners. You don't necessarily have to have, one large SI that can do it all. And there's situations where that's useful. So I'm not saying that's always bad, but you can choose a couple of experts that are very deep in that specific SaaS vendor or piece of your landscape, and do it with a couple of partners. So choose your partner landscape with composable mindset in mind, I would say. And the last, also mentioned with many of your previous guests, consider your organizational readiness.
Okay.
Often, changing your digital landscape, we see brands trying to do 2 things at once. They're trying to change the technology, but also trying to change the organization. And that's not always needed. I think your partners can help you a lot, but also make sure that, as you said, business readiness, buy-in is there before you start.
Okay, nice. But definitely 3 very good tips. And like you said, some of them are kind of reoccurring from the previous season, which to me is a good thing, because this is what you guys are saying is important to prepare yourself for this transformation. And you're looking at people like yourself who was on the agency side, looking at leaders from the customer side as well. Picking your right partners is absolutely pivotal. Making sure the business is ready, again, absolutely pivotal. It probably sounds like really obvious things, but I guess sometimes it's the obvious things that can get looked over. And
learn
so,
from your partners. I mean, agencies have done this before, so you don't have to figure it out beforehand before you actually put the RFP out or something, right? You can ask around and you can see what we've done for other organizations, or you can talk to peer brands that have done this before. That there's quite a lot of knowledge available now. It's not that new anymore.
yeah, for me, that's one of the really important things. And I would be surprised if companies don't do it. I know on a very smaller scale, whenever we look to bring in a new piece of software for our business, one of the first questions we ask is, cool, have you got any case studies? Who have you implemented this into?
Yeah.
And we try and get an off the record reference, because you're obviously going to point someone to the best possible case study, right? But if there's a business that you know where you could speak to somebody on a slightly more off the record conversation, then that's what you want to try and do to understand exactly, is it as it says it is, and how was the implementation. So I'd be surprised if that didn't happen within this space as well, but I'm sure there's cases where it doesn't. But I certainly think understanding, cool, okay, does this business do what they say they've done? Have they done all of these transformations, et cetera, et cetera? I think it's such an important thing to understand, because we all know sales guys are very good, and some may even pull the wool over people's eyes, right? But but yeah, there's no harm in verifying. So okay, cool. Moving on to the next question then, Michiel. So um, this is one that I think could be really valuable. It's particularly following on the point we just made about picking the right SI or SIs. What's the number one thing that you would advise an end customer to check before finalizing their SI selection?
Yeah, you've actually just mentioned that.
Okay.
I think the experience is important. So checking whether or not, checking live cases basically, and talking to some of the clients of that SI, how that went. Because even though, and I may contradict myself a bit here, but because even though it's not that new anymore, we're still in a learning phase. It's still a phase where the first platforms have been live for a year or 2 years, and the promise of Composable, the promise of future interchangeability, the flexibility in your landscape still has to be proven basically. So having done this I know from our own experience that with each implementation we learn something new again, and we've been doing this for as you said, the better half of 10 years. It's a learning process, and showing that experience can really, checking the experience basically can really help brands, I think, in making the right choice, because anybody can tell the story, but yeah, to show how you've done it really helps, I think.
Yeah, and look, and let's be real, you learn when things don't necessarily go your way.
Yeah,
So the more of these situations you can be involved in where maybe something didn't go your way, but you've had to come together to find the solution to make it work, that is then what enables you to predict what would happen in the future when you're involved in a similar scenario.
yeah,
So I certainly think the more composable transformations you can be involved in, the better equipped you're going to be to deliver successful ones in the future. Let's be real, there's always going to be a problem, right? You're integrating something completely new into different individual ecosystems every single time.
yeah,
It's not straightforward, right? But I guess you can draw back on past experiences to say, oh, hang on a minute, we've done this before and this didn't quite work, so we need to check that, and so on and so forth. Um,
yeah.
um, I guess on that note, is there uh, is there any one project that comes to mind for you guys that you faced maybe more challenges there than you initially expected?
I can share what we've learned in some of our early cases, and this is again more towards how you deal with the business. So we've learned that from a technology perspective, you can build anything you want, and you tend to want to solve things in the best technological way that's possible. But especially in enterprises that serve large and small brands, or large and small regions, or large and small fascias, it doesn't really matter. There is a difference to make between how far you go in that technology. So the lessons we've learned is to consider that quite early on. and that's sort of a landscape question. Okay, you've got this first launching brand that you're replacing the technology for. That may be an example for others. So you may choose some really deep technology, but the consideration is also, if you in the future have smaller brands, will it still be viable for them to make that cost and to pay for those licenses, for example. So considering basically the large version and the small version of what a brand needs early on, that helps in making the right choices for the landscape. And if you don't do that, we've sometimes ran into the situation where we had a very comprehensive technical solution that fits all brands, but maybe too heavy for the smaller ones. And also in that sense, maybe too expensive in terms of licensing, maintenance, all of that. So even though the solution was correct, it was fit for the larger applications, basically.
Yeah, that makes complete sense as well. And yeah, I think it's like you said, probably something that you maybe don't necessarily consider at the start. You look at the bigger brand, think that fits well, but then as you look at the wider business case, then actually hang on a minute, is this really necessary for this brand here? It only operates locally, etc., etc. Okay, well, appreciate that. Thank you, Michiel. Now move on to the last question, and want to understand your mystic meg abilities here, Michiel. So, where do you see the market going from here? We're at the end of 2023. I think it's been a tough year for many. Where do you see the next 2 or 3 years develop? How do you see the next 2 or 3 years developing in the composable space?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that you see happening now is SIs and agencies solving some of that, the fact that you have to make things connect together if you go on composable, solving that by developing accelerators. And I do feel that in the next few years, that's a very special position that SIs and agencies have now to do that. So I'm assuming that's going to be solved differently in the future. I'm assuming it's going to be commoditized in some way. So either it's going to be a product that does all of that, or it's going to be the SaaS vendors themselves that, offer some of that connectability out of the box.
I believe we're seeing commerce tools do that already, aren't we? They've recently released their connector type piece for a few of their different ISVs in the Mac Alliance.
Yeah. You see some of the SaaS vendors already stepping into that, and I do believe that it's not going to be a position for SIs and agencies, because we're serving brands. We're not necessarily software builders. So I think that's a unique situation that's probably going to change, or somehow will be commoditized. On the other hand, also I think composable becoming more mainstream, it's going to move down a bit in the market. So mid segments, the smaller segments, brands may also want to go composable, and that's going to put pressure on vendors to offer things out of the box more, but also improving the UX, for example, so that smaller brands that may not be able to do to make the same investment as larger ones, have a more easy way to step into composable than currently is the case. It's still a little bit of price wise and time wise, it's fit for enterprise, but it may be a bit more difficult for medium-sized or smaller brands. So I'm assuming those two things will change the market and will make things basically more commoditized and easier to step into.
Okay. That's certainly be interesting. I think a lot of people that I've spoke to and previously have mentioned companies that maybe aren't necessarily ready for it. Either is the business ready, or do they have the money behind themselves? Do they have the technical or the digital maturity within the business to be able to manage a composable transformation moving forward, as being challenges? So if I guess if you can make that all slightly easier and actually then target some of the smaller SME enterprises, then actually that could really help accelerate the growth for Composable. So that would definitely be a way to, I guess, increase the market share. Almost everyone I speak to talks about the complexity of it and the need to have a sufficient team, either ideally internally, because it's going to be bespoke code for the business. But if not, then definitely body shop for an agency.
You do touch on an interesting point, because there's still quite a lot of work needed to make it all work together, and we solve this through accelerators. But obviously, much of the work can be commoditized. It's just making things work together, basically. And I do think to be able to open this up to a different market, a more medium-sized, small business market. Sorry. You need to take away some of that effort. Otherwise, it will always be too expensive, of course. So to compete with monolithic solutions, something needs to happen there to commoditize and to solve some of that repeat work. And we're doing that through accelerators, but it's actually strange that agencies are doing that, of course. Why would we, as an agency in a product market, offer a solution that's inherent to the product?
And that's it. And it, interestingly enough, actually, the chap who I've got booked in for episode number 2 is someone I met at the expo a couple of months ago. He's very much against accelerators via agencies. He said that's not what we're here to do. That's not why you would hire an agency for an accelerator.
I agree.
We don't build the software, right? We integrate the software into their environment. So why would we reuse code that we've used for somebody else? Because that code is for somebody else and not for them. So that'd be quite. I'm looking forward to that conversation as well. Because whilst I personally can see a lot of benefits to having accelerators, I completely understand that viewpoint as well.
Yeah. So the way we solve that is we give them the code, so it doesn't become a lock-in, because obviously the whole thing is that you don't want to create a lock-in with a vendor if going composable. But accelerators have the risk of that, right? You can, if you're building something that you can only use through that accelerator, you're now stuck to this SI or agency. So we solve that by basically saying it's yours. But still, I agree, it's a unique position as an agency to be in.
So but I think it's fair to say that there's still a lot of innovation that can happen in the space. We've seen the rise of the move to composable over the last 5 years in particular. And as you touched upon a few minutes ago, we're still very much in its infancy as well. We're only really at that first phase of companies that have gone through the transformation and are now at the point in which they are looking at, okay, should we switch out our search? Should we switch out our PIM or our CMS? And we've already heard some stories in the market around whilst these businesses have got best of breed software, actually the way it's been put together is almost like a big monolith anyway. So it's giving them headaches. So I think we're at a really interesting time in the move to composable architecture. And whilst I do firmly believe that the best way forward is to have that composable mindset where you may not be best of breed for everything, or at least not now anyway, but you're moving towards that where you have the key areas for your business as a standalone, and whether that's put into something like an SAP Commerce, for example, or a big commerce or whatever. It's what works for the business, I think, is key. And you look at the business problems, you solve the problems with the technology afterwards.
Yeah, fully agree.
Awesome. All right, well, really appreciate your time today, Michiel. Thank you very much for joining us. It's first episode of season 5, so this is the first of a handful of conversations we'll be having with agency leaders like yourself who have been there, done it multiple times, and engaged with customers on a monthly basis around what to and what not to do when it comes to the move to composable architecture. Thanks again. I appreciate your honesty and telling not just myself but the audience some of the war stories that you faced over the last 10 years. And for those that have listened, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it valuable. Please do like, share, and comment and get it out to those that need it. We'll see you again soon.
you.